Welcome to Inside Asia. Asia is changing and changing very rapidly with the rise of China, followed by the rise of India, and now you have a new regional power, Indonesia. Today in our program, Dr. Michael Green, former special assistant to President George Bush on national security affairs, and he is also Japan chair of CSIS based in Washington, and he's a prolific writer on strategic matters. Dr. Michael, Asia is rising fast. India is rising fast. Indonesia is following. So what is your verdict? What is the future of Asia? Is it preordained?
Well, the rise of Asia is called by some people the re-rise of Asia. The share of global economic output, GDP, of Asia in the year that Western Europeans first landed in America was about 60% of the whole world economy. So most of human history, Asia has been the dominant region of the world, and it was really the creation of the Western nation state with the Westphalian system of missionaries abroad, and especially the Industrial Revolution that caused the West to surge ahead. And so that at the end of World War II, Asia's share of global economy was only about 15% or so. Now it's approaching more than 40% and will be the dominant economic center of the world.
So it's like a cycle of sorts.
So there's a certain cycle to it. Academics, international relations experts, so-called realists or structural realists worry that when you have such a sudden shift in power, you can easily have war because the powers that are rising conflict with the powers that are in the top. And right now, people think perhaps there could be conflict between the United States and China. And in the last 200 years, we have had three precedents, three countries that have risen in the international order with the speed of China. The U.S., and Britain was the leading power, and we did not fight a war at the end of the 19th century. The other two were Germany and Japan, and there was a war between the Anglo-American democracies and authoritarian Germany, authoritarian Japan. I think the reason that there was conflict was in part because of the shifting power, but also, frankly, regime type matters. Britain and the United States did not fight a war when America surpassed Britain in power, in part because we have a common culture, but mainly because we have common political institutions. So whether or not the rise of Asia will be peaceful will depend, I think, on whether or not China, in particular, can develop modern political institutions that are more inclusive, transparent, that allow for participation from the public, and that also allow a reassurance for other countries in this.
Are you saying that the world has to change China before China changed the world?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So in the 1970s, after Richard Nixon, as president, traveled to China in 1972.
That is the watershed, you think?
That was the watershed. And we in the United States and most of the world, or at least the West, and the democratic world, we made a gamble. We gambled that this would change China before China changed the world. And now people are asking if that's going to happen.
Yes.
On the whole, I'm optimistic, though, because if China were emerging in Asia with a political system, an ideology, and an economic model that was dominant to democracy or the free market, then you might have the possibility that China could develop primacy or hegemonic control in Asia and then clash with the United States, the way Japan did.
Yes.
Before World War II. But China is extremely insecure about its own system, extremely nervous about its legitimacy, and very worried about its economic growth.
So it will lead to the cumberings of the communist system as it is today?
I don't think that, well, first of all, Deng Xiaoping and his successors, and the Chinese Communist Party, and of course the Chinese people, deserve remarkable kudos in history. They have brought more people out of poverty, hundreds and hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, than any other regime has in history. It's remarkable, and it's good for humankind, and it's good for history. On the other hand, I don't think the Chinese Communist Party, as an institution, is capable of managing the China that is emerging in the 21st century. Too diverse, too much fluidity in society, too many expectations internationally. The system is too brittle. They have to reform, or I think it will break.
Deng Xiaoping talked about for modernization. I think China needs another modernization that is modernize itself to comply with the international system.
Right.
So far, are you surprised that China has not yet really lead international responsibility, performing jobs that major power should do in global politics?
I'm not so surprised. You know, the Chinese leadership is essentially still Dengist. They still follow Deng Xiaoping's basic strategic approach, which is keep a low profile internationally, don't take risks internationally, and focus on stability and development, and from that legitimacy for the leadership at home. So many Chinese in the emerging generation are ambitious for China, but the leadership is not so ambitious abroad. They're ambitious at home. They see nothing but incomplete work, entropy, chaos, uncertainty when they look at their domestic political and economic landscape. That's their focus. But they're so big, and they have so much money, and their military is so large now, that even when they do little things abroad, it has a big impact. Or if they don't do things that they should do, it has a big impact. And this is one aspect that's simply not sustainable. The Chinese leadership is not answering the expectations of Asia or the world.
That's correct.
It's also not answering the expectations of the Chinese people. They have done remarkable things since Deng Xiaoping, but you're right, they need a fifth modernization, or maybe a fifth and sixth modernization. 5 would be modernized political institutions.
Yes, sir.
And 6 would be modernized foreign policy.
I see. So in a way, the rulers in China is only interested in their own survival. That is the supremacy of the Communist Party at the moment, because they seldom look toward the participation of the mass and follow them.
I think that's right. Although, these are not leaders who are like Gaddafi or Mubarak. These are not people who are stealing from the people to enrich themselves. There's corruption in China, and increasingly the corruption is a problem. But I think that for the most part, the members of the Politburo, people like Hu Jintao or Xi Jinping, Premier Wen Jiabao, I think they are sincere Confucian leaders. They believe that they have a responsibility to maintain order and prosperity in society. So I don't think that they're selfish in the way that dictators or authoritarians are in other parts of the world. I don't think they're selfish in that way. I think they worry about China and China's position in the world. And I think they worry that without order and prosperity at home, China could slip into chaos and once again go back to becoming the victim of the West in international affairs. It's a wrong prescription for the future of China, but it's not selfish. I do think they're patriotic in a very sincere and fundamental way.
So besides America, what other Asian country you think can rise and serve as a countervailing forces against the rise of China?
Well, the U.S. has shifted its overall strategy in Asia twice in the last 40 years. The first time really was when President Nixon opened to China as a counterweight to the Soviet Union. And as a grand strategy, that was very successful. It brought some risks. How will the U.S. deal with an increasingly powerful China? But it helped to counter the Soviet power after the Vietnam War and maintain American influence and generally maintain peace in Asia since that time in the 1970s. I think the second shift was after the Cold War, when the U.S. added, I think, a corollary to the original strategy of engaging China. And that was to engage China and continue working on strong relations and cooperation, but in addition to engagement, balance. The first counterbalance was Japan in the mid-1990s, which a country that was very optimistic about its relations with China, and suddenly in the 90s became very alarmed at China's assertive stance vis-a-vis Taiwan and Senkaku and other islands.
Yes.
And then in the Bush administration, the second part of the balancing act came in, which was India. India is not an ally like Japan or Thailand, but India's growing power is viewed in Washington as generally good for the system because India is a democracy and because India is not fundamentally a revisionist power. India will not challenge the fundamental basic norms and rules of American-led neoliberal order. So India was the second part. And I think in the Obama administration comes phase 3 of this engaging and balancing. And phase 3 of the balancing is trying to do more with Korea, which was difficult for the Bush administration because Roh Moo-hyun, the president, was a leftist and a bit unpredictable. And then ASEAN. I think ASEAN is the next stage. In Beijing, many scholars and officials think this is containment. It's not containment because the U.S. view is treaty allies like Thailand, Japan, Australia should have good relations with China. It's not, from Washington's perspective, it is not zero sum. If Thailand has good relations with China, that doesn't mean China has to have bad relations with the U.S. But what I think Washington has wanted from Clinton to Bush to Obama, and there's a lot of consensus on Asia policy between Republicans and Democrats, I think what Washington has wanted is a regional equilibrium where China would not be tempted to think it can change the rules because of its growing power. And where Beijing recognizes that the consensus in this region is not behind authoritarian models, but behind democratic, open, and responsible models of domestic politics and foreign policy.
It will take a long time before the whole regional system become as what you has just described.
It's very fluid.
Very fluid, yeah, I agree.
I'll give you one example. We did a survey 2 years ago at one of my jobs is at Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS. We asked in 9 countries among elites, strategic thinkers in this survey, we asked, do you support East Asian community building? 80% said yes across the region. So everyone is in favor of East Asia community building. And we asked them, what should the purpose be in 10 years if we continue this?